Hello, this is Mark Tooley, editor of Providence, a journal of Christianity and American foreign policy, with my fellow Marks and fellow editors, Mark Melton, Mark Livecki, for a final bittersweet episode with three Marks, as it is the last working day for managing editor Mark Melton. We will take a look at three pieces in Providence this week, one from our contributor Eric Patterson on G.K. Chesterton and Flag Day, another by Gerald McDermott on the state of Christian Zionism, and thirdly, but not least, a piece from Reinhold Niebuhr 75 years ago on Christian realism in post-war Europe. But first, let's start with Gerald McDermott's piece on the state of Christian Zionism. He's responding to a piece, I believe, in Tikva. Is that right, Mark Melton?
I think so, yeah.
In which a Jewish writer laments the state of Christianity and its attitudes towards Israel, citing the Episcopal Church and other mainline churches who have been on an anti-Israel trajectory for the last 40 years or more. Gerald McDermott rightly points out that Jews and Christians and other friends of Israel should not be overly concerned, if at all, about these activisms from fast shrinking, very liberal, previously prominent, now no longer so, mainline Protestant denominations. The action for American religion is largely among evangelicals, Catholics, post-denominationals, and Jerry rightly points out that evangelicals by and large remain pro-Israel, and that there is, as the traditional dispensationalism recedes, arising a new thoughtful Christian Zionism that is ecumenical and not tied to any of the fashions of the 20th century. So McDermott urges Jewish and Christian friends to be encouraged about the state of American and Christian attitudes towards Israel. Of course, Jerry himself has been a leader in crafting a new form of Christian Zionism, which roots Christian support for Israel in the apostles and in centuries of church teaching. Any thoughts from you other Marks?
Yeah, sure. I always like Jared's stuff on Israel. I always think it's salient and wise. I'm as optimistic, I think, as he is. I think it's right to point to the encouraging and continued trajectory. At the same time, I'm a bit of a curmudgeon, and as the light continues to hopefully go out on sort of the knee-jerk, indiscriminate anti-Israelism, I'm all for keeping our foot on the neck of it. I'm more than happy to continue to help it along on its demise, and I don't think we should ignore it for the sake of optimism or purely encouragement. That said, I think he's right to point out that the remedy to a lot of this is continued information. I think more inquiry, less pronouncements was one of Jared's signs of encouragement that evangelical Christians and other Christians have been simply looking more deeply into the historic context, the theological background of Israel, and coming up with far more informed wisdom on ancient Israel, on contemporary Israel, and then on the whole context of the Middle East. All of that, I think, is salutary. I believe enough in the truth that if the truth is outed, that the truth will be at least persuasive to those who are open to persuasion. So I think that is certainly the route to go. And he's right to point to places like Philos Project, which helped founded Providence in its early days and gave us at least one of the spokes in our wheels, which is this insistence on pushing against the knee-jerk and indiscriminate anti-Israelism that I pointed out, your own work on New Zionism, etc. So I think there's a lot of encouraging things. I think he's also right that just like we might disdain the indiscriminate knee-jerk anti-Israelism, it's equally right to disdain the knee-jerk indiscriminate pro-Israelism, which is why I like that Philos Project and Providence and the work that Gerald's been doing, has always been willing to call balls and strikes on contemporary Israel, even as we look to ancient Israel and the wisdom of the Hebrew tradition and scriptures to demonstrate the ongoing importance and relevance of Israel as a nation and as a land. So always, from my earliest days with Providence, been encouraged by the work that I see, that cadre of Christian thinkers do. So happy to publish them again.
I was going to add a fact check. It was tablet.
Tablet, yes. Thank you, Mark Melton.
Nicely done. That might be your last fact check. That's exciting.
Unless there's something egregious in the next couple of minutes.
As there very well could be.
Yeah.
Certainly a good chance.
Eric Patterson's piece on Flag Day, which was this past week, not so much celebrated as it used to be, but still significant. And Patterson reflects on Flag Day through the prism of G.K. Chesterton and Chesterton's affirmation that Christians are placed by God in particular political communities and rightly care about those communities, love and cherish those communities, and even celebrate those communities. Also, through the prism of Christianity, we appreciate the importance of and the value of sacrifice, and that we are all called to sacrifice for the wider community, which of course is a remedy to our often self-preoccupation and hyper-individualism. So it was a helpful and rich piece reminding us that we can be Christians and patriots, rightly understood. Your thoughts, Marks?
Yeah, I think this is a good piece that kind of continues the thread that both, so this was co-written with Eric and Abigail Lindner, if that's how you pronounce her name. I'll let someone else fact check that. But so yeah, they've written a series of articles looking at works by G.K. Chesterton. Last year, Eric Patterson wrote about C.S. Lewis a bit on the same type of subject. So yeah, I would recommend not just look at this one, but look at the other ones, including the ones that we did in February about sports and loving your country and rooting for sports. And there's a lot, I haven't read a lot of Chesterton, and so I think I should go back and read. There's just so much to read. It's almost intimidating to start, but yeah, it's interesting. I haven't seen a lot of people celebrate Flag Day. I know for us, like, I think, occasionally I might see people mention it, but other than these, I don't see a lot of people commemorating Flag Day. What about y'all? Do you see other people doing it, or in the past, even the past, I didn't see much of it?
It's never been a huge holiday. I have noticed flags on display throughout the decades of my life, more so on Flag Day than on others, but no, it hasn't been a central focus in our culture. The chief patriotic holidays remain, of course, July 4th, Memorial Day, and Veterans Day.
Yeah, I probably have to say the same. I think anybody who follows the the calendar of when to hang a flag is going to hang a flag over the weekend. But beyond that, I'm not really sure. I like the article for its for the reminder on the importance of land, as you've already touched on nation, as Patterson describes it. Old Gene Elstein used to say that before somebody can, belong anywhere, they have to belong somewhere. And to belong to a tribe, a people that are brought together by shared loves, or at least ostensibly shared loves, is an important thing. It gives you a sense of identity. And then with that identity, you can go out into the wider world and have something useful to contribute. You can't simply belong everywhere. The world's too big for that. And so I think it's salutary to remember that, as Chesterton puts it, and as Eric quotes, that clods of dirt actually matter, which brings us back in some ways to the piece on Israel. The land has always mattered. It's always been important to have a home, and it's always been important to identify, therefore, the special obligations that you have to your near neighbors and their interests, and therefore the set of corresponding responsibilities that result from that. That seems a key backbone and a key insight of a continuing reclamation of Christian realism.
And then finally, this piece by Reinhold Niebuhr and the Marshall Plan after World War II. There's a wonderful conclusion, which if you'll indulge me, I'll read a few sentences from, because it is as relevant today as it was 75 years ago, in which Niebuhr writes, "We cannot afford the hysteria to which those are tempted who understand the perils of our day any more than we can afford the complacency of those who are blind to our perils. Hysterical talk about the inevitability of a third world war and the necessity of preparing for it is just as irresponsible as the policy of yielding to tyranny in order to avoid war. We are fated to live for a long while in a world in which no stable peace can be guaranteed, but it does not follow that a war is either inevitable or desirable. We can do our duty in this kind of world only if we are as sober as we are firm. It is worth observing that the whole of modern culture, with its promise of quick and sure results for the right action, has not prepared us for this kind of moral experience. This nation must draw upon the resources of the Christian faith if we are to do our duty each day without too many fearful apprehensions and too many unjustified hopes about tomorrow. Sufficient unto the day are the evils thereof." A timeless message, but especially pertinent for today. Mark Levesque.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Niebuhr not infrequently captures it. Absolutely. Key insights to Christian realism. I think what you just read could be an apt introduction. Could be stuck on the masthead. That's exactly right.
Mark Melton, your final comments to your 7-year career with Providence, a journal of Christianity and American foreign policy.
No pressure.
Yeah, right. So I would kind of start with it by kind of mentioning this article that you just cited, the kind of the historical context there. You have the one side of Christians who were writing, say, like the Episcopalians in the Witness, for example, being under the idea that if we were to be resisting Russia at all, it would inevitably lead to war. So Niebuhr's responding to that on the one side. On the other side, there are two different groups. One is apparently talking about actually going to war. I'm not sure how large that group was or how influential they were, because America at this time was very war weary. Just the year before, you had a mass mutiny of troops who were protesting, wanting to go home because the war is over. And so I think this was like the only time you have a mass mutiny where they were actually successful. And that's protests across Europe and other parts of the world. And then you also have other hystericals or people that they were criticizing the Catholics who wanted to be very firm with Russia, firmer than they wanted. On that point, I think the Catholics were actually right on that point, as I've written previously. But that's where you kind of experiment and find out what's the right policy. How firm do you need to be with Russia? So Niebuhr is, interacting with both sides of this argument. They're trying to thread that needle. And so, and if you read Christianity in Crisis over these years, you see a gradual evolution of ideas here. And the other one I would bring up is enlightened interest that I mentioned in the intro here, or the editorial note to begin the article. Normally, Christian realists don't like talking about self-interest, and yet you see Reinhold Niebuhr here kind of mentioning that. Last week, I wrote an article that kind of, gives out, 5 different impressions I have, and one of the last ones was I think they needed to be more sympathetic to self-interest and make arguments based on enlightened interests. And after I published that, I then kind of prepared this article and realized, well, here's Niebuhr actually mentioning it. I don't think he does that very often, or I haven't seen very many in this time frame. And so I think that's welcomed. I think he should have been making that argument in 1946. They were talking about giving the British a loan. Their argument was, we need to be generous. It's the right, good thing. And they should have been arguing it's in our interest to help Britain, which wasn't a popular idea in 1946. It became a popular idea in 47 and 48 with the Marshall Plan. So I'm not sure if y'all know of any other moments where Niebuhr talks about enlightened interest. So I think that's an interesting bit with this editorial here. And on final notes, like I said, I last week talked about kind of my article where fairly long article, but go through 5 different impressions I have. So I would kind of highlight that for some overarching ideas about Christian realism. In there, I try to give a Meltonian view of Christian realism, if I would call it that. So, but on final note, I would just say thank you for the years of allowing me to write and to grow in this position, and look forward to seeing what y'all do with the journal hereafter.
Hopefully, Mark Melton, you will remain an ongoing contributor to Providence from your new vantage point at the Hudson Institute.
Right. Maybe you can have me as a contributing editor.
Oh my goodness, that could yet to be negotiated. Stay tuned, but thank you for 7 years of faithful and effective service, Mark Melton, and thank you, Mark Levesque, for this conversation. We will soldier onward, Mark Levesque and I, as at least two heads of the previously three-headed Hydra, for our next episode of Marksism. Until then, bye-bye.